Hello, this is Pam. Today is part 3 or step 3 in the Live Disease Free plan, which is to minimize toxins. I am hosting a series of videos, short videos, talking about discussing this essential steps that we take to recover from chronic disease. Myself, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis over 30 years ago, and by the grace of God, I learned very early on that what I was dealing with was chronic infections in the body. And so, what I have developed, again, by the grace of God, and working with over 700 wellness champion students in this Live Disease Free plan, we have come together with really, really important steps that help us to recover. These are vital steps. So, the first step that I shared a couple of weeks ago was the Live Disease Free diet. Very important first step because that is the step that decreases the food to the infections that are making us sick. We start to have less inflammation. We start to enjoy some symptom improvements, significant symptom improvements, because those infections are less active. And that is the vital first step. And we are giving our body a lot of nutrition. The second step is really to support the body. And I talked about that last week. And there are very specific steps that we take to support the body. And that, again, helps us to start feeling better. So before we start treating, it's very important that we have a successful prep phase. And that is the diet, the Live Disease Free diet, and supporting the body. So if you didn't watch those videos, make sure to go back and catch them. So now we're on to step 3, which is to minimize toxins. And we are living in a time when there are toxins in our environment that we did not have to deal with 50 years ago. So, with these toxins in the environment, they impact our ability to recover, the speed of our recovery, and they also impact how much we detox. So, as we can decrease the toxins from the environment, but also from within, from these infections, then we can heal quicker, recover quicker, and we can detox less. And it has a great anti-aging property to it too. So everybody loves that also. So with respect to, let's start off with the internal toxins. When we have these infections, the infections that cause all of our horrible symptoms of the brain fog and poor memory and maybe depression and anxiety, but also things like spasticity and muscle tightness and stiffness and pain and balance issues. It goes on and on. All of the neurological symptoms in multiple sclerosis, but other diseases also. So we have, as I've taught in many other videos, if you haven't watched, I've got a whole section on Live Disease Free YouTube channel. It's called Infections. Go and watch, and you can learn about some of the infections that have been discovered that cause MS. But the thing is that they don't just live inside of us and cause our immune system to fight, but they also produce a lot of poison. So I like to say that when we have chronic disease and we have this dysbiosis and we have a parasitic infestation, we really have our own personal chemical factory inside our bodies. The biggest base camp of the problem is in the intestines, but by the time we have chronic disease, those infections have moved throughout our body. They've moved into our bloodstream, into our organs, and into our central nervous system. We know that different types of microbes produce things like fungi will produce mycotoxins, which are some of the most deadly toxins known on the planet. And maybe you've heard of aflatoxins. So there are many, many different toxins that different types of yeast and mold can produce. And then bacteria and parasites, so they can produce all kinds of other biotoxins. So things like ammonia and amphetamines and morphine-like substances and acetaldehyde and formaldehyde and different types of alcohol, like especially ethanol. So we can be flooded with all these different poisons from various infections, which our liver is trying to clean out of our blood, but sometimes it just can't keep up. And then that can really, really impact us. It will impact our recovery. If we are dealing with tons of toxins from our own personal chemical factory, it really slows down recovery. It really makes the treatments not work as well either. So we have to address that. And it's not just the intestines, but there's a lot more research starting to show that chronic infections in our teeth really slow down our recovery also, because the microbes will hide in little pockets where maybe we've had teeth removed, or maybe we're dealing with root canals where there's dead roots of the tooth left, and the bacteria and smaller parasites can hide in there, and they can release their toxins into the blood. And that's even been linked with cancer, etc. So it impacts our immune system tremendously. It impacts our ability to recover. So this is where we'll talk about, I'll actually just talk about that here right now, but for dental infections, this is where we want to start looking for a biological dentist, because they are aware, they have been trained on this, and depending on how much experience they have, but this is something they look for. They will look for, like, if we've had wisdom teeth removed, if we could possibly have cavitation issues, or maybe we've had root canals. And apparently, all root canals become infected in time. And this is according to really like research, but also the findings of different dentists. Weston Price, for example, he has researched and he was never able to find a root canal that was not infected in time. So that is really important. So going to a biological dentist, they're able to identify hidden dental infections, and there are a small number of doctors that can do that also, especially if they do energy testing. Dr. Rowan, for example, you can look him up later. If you just look for Dr. Rowan and ozone, and you'll find his YouTube channel. Watch some of his videos about people that are really, really sick will go into his office, and he has a tooth meridian chart. He will ask them a bunch of questions and he'll assess them. And then, because he's done this like probably thousands of times with different patients, he'll kind of connect through the tooth meridian chart. He'll connect the nerves from whatever area they're dealing with. Maybe it's hip pain, and he'll connect it up to a certain tooth. He will lightly freeze that tooth, and then the patient will have immediate symptom improvement. And then he'll say, go talk to your biological dentist and get that tooth checked out, because you've got some kind of infection in it, and that's causing inflammation to the nerves. And so when you see this, I looked at his video several years ago. It's just so shocking. People that can barely walk going into his office, he freezes a specific tooth. Within 3 minutes, they are walking around. So that tooth is no longer, the nerves are no longer inflamed, and they start to have symptom relief. So those infections in the teeth, they not only inflame the nerve, but they're producing poisons that are really impacting our immune function and our ability to heal and recover. So biological dentists are great. They use ozone a lot of times for treating teeth instead of antibiotics. They'll decide what they want to use depending on what you're dealing with. But if they're removing root canals, they will remove it safely. Sometimes they have to take away some of our bone because the infection may have gone into it. But that's something that I was not aware of several years ago, and it's something that you really need to look into. So making sure that we do not have hidden dental infections, and so that's really important. So, and then we've talked about, and we will continue to talk about, the infections inside our intestines. We're not going to focus on that today because that's a huge topic. That is going to be one of the later steps in recovering, because we have to correct the microbiome. And so there's very specific ways that we do that, different treatments. But right now we're setting up, we did the prep phase over the last 2 weeks, and now we're talking about minimizing toxins so that our treatment is going to be as successful, and like, we want to recover as quickly as possible. We want to use as little treatments as possible to get the job done. And that is why all these steps are really critical to our success. So that is the toxins within. And when we talk about environmental toxins, there are a lot nowadays, right? So there's fluoride in our water, and that is a really big concern. I'm not going to go into great detail about that, but that's something you can research. And then there is, I can't say the word, but they are dimming the sun to impact climate change, and they're spraying things into our sky that some testing has been done, and there's potentially different types of elements that should not be in there. So we are exposed to heavy metals that we're not even aware of in different parts of our environment, and et cetera, and different pesticides, et cetera. So and then also the xenoestrogens, which are man-made, like estrogen type they're not estrogen hormones, but they're estrogen type, they're synthetic estrogens, but they impact our hormonal system, especially for men and women. So whether we're talking about fluoride or xenoestrogens or what's coming down through the sky and what's in our water, these are all really, really important things that need to be addressed. And we don't have to lose sleep over it, but we just have to be wise and we have to filter our water. It's good to filter your air if you can. It's good to do heavy metal detoxes occasionally, and we do them at home instead of doing chelation. That's more expensive and a little bit more harsh. But the key is that being aware of these toxins, because when we decrease the toxins, we will heal quicker and we will detox less. We will tolerate the treatments a lot better. So let's talk about two environmental toxins that I feel are really the most significant with respect to my students recovering. So when we're preparing to treat, my students always explore these two topics in environmental toxins. Let's talk about mold first. So mold is a type of fungus, and maybe some of you know about the yeast like Candida. There's a lot of cousins of Candida. There's other types of yeast, but there's also molds and mold, M-O-L-D. And it's very important that we address we'll talk more about how to treat the Candida and the mold growing inside of us when we get to the treatment part of these infections. But right now, let's talk about the environmental impact. So a number of my students that have chronic disease, cancer, MS, all kinds of other neurological diseases, they lived in a moldy home or a moldy apartment, or they've had a moldy workplace. It might have been like in a school, it might have been a portable, it might be in an office space, it could be in their home. They may have had water damage sometimes their roof was leaky, sometimes damage in their bathroom. Usually it's more than that though. Sometimes it's living in a really moist environment. So some of my students in Europe, they might have mold growing on their walls because it's so moist. So you might live in a place where it's really, really moist and mold likes to grow. If there's a little bit of like soil, like dust or dirt and a lot of moisture, mold will like to grow there. And so it's very important for us to be a detective and to get somebody to go in our attic and just do some inspecting, make sure we don't have any leaks, making sure we go into the basement and just checking around for any kind of water that might sit around, or maybe the tiles in the bathroom or the surround where the tub is, making sure there's no black mold anywhere, looking for black mold everywhere you can. And there is something called an ERMI test that you can have done. There's probably other things you can go to local remediation companies in your area and ask them if they have anything. But mold and fungi, they can produce, again, some of the most toxic mycotoxins in the world that directly suppress our immune system. And people that have been in a moldy environment, they can be so sick in the years later. Like they might have been living in a moldy home for, I don't know, a few years, longer, shorter, but it impacts our health tremendously. There's a really good documentary. It's not brand new, but it was well done, and it's called Moldy, M-O-L-D-Y, and I believe you can probably still watch it online for free if you Google search Moldy and documentary and watch it. I think you might have to opt in to watch it for free, but you can always unsubscribe after. But that movie, it helps you appreciate. I watched it years ago, but when you watch it, you're just like, oh my gosh, these people that have been living in a moldy home, they have a lot of the symptoms that I do if I have a neurological disease, right? And it's just shocking. So these mycotoxins are incredibly toxic to our body. And then if we're in a moldy environment, we can actually have it growing inside of us, producing toxins inside of us. And Candida and different types of yeast and molds, they live in us in small amounts. They're called commensal organisms. So if we have a healthy ecosystem with lots and lots of good microbes that are doing all kinds of healthy things for us, like helping us digest our food, making vitamins for us, and modulating our immune system, and on and on and on, then we have that thick natural defense. If there's a little bit of yeast or mold, that we get from our environment, it's not able to establish itself. Think about a really healthy lawn. It's thick, thick, lush grass, and a little dandelion seed, flutters over onto your lawn. And it probably is not going to be able to establish itself because you have such a healthy, thick growth of lawn. And so, if we had a healthy ecosystem, then the yeast and the mold, the yeast and the mold are not going to establish themselves in us. But like myself and many of the students I work with, we were on a lot of antibiotics very often before the age of 10. And when we do that, we devastate our natural defense, all those good guys. It's like putting Roundup on your lawn pretty much. And then we have, when the dandelion seed comes in, it's got lots of room to grow. And if we're still watering the lawn and fertilizing it, the dandelion takes off. So in our intestines, we devastate our good, healthy microbes. And then that small number of yeast and mold, now it's got all this room to grow. It's moist, it's warm, it's damp. There's lots of food present in our intestines. Perfect conditions for fungus to grow. And it grows and it grows and it starts to create a root structure. It starts to go crossing into our bloodstream. It moves through the blood into different organs, including our central nervous system. And that has been found in studies where they're finding fungus growing in the brain cells of people that suffer with MS, also in the nucleus of the brain cells. And that's pretty recent research. So when we have this fungus, different types of fungi, yeast or mold living inside of us, we have a problem with a lot of mycotoxins just inside of us, but then also we're breathing them in if they are in our environment. So what kind of things can we do? If you watch that documentary Moldy, if you have a moldy home, it's so important to understand that it takes a lot to deal with mold in your home, because if you've had mold in your home, the spores from the mold, they blow around. They're on your walls, they're on our drapes, they're on our clothing, they're everywhere. They're in our carpet. So it's not enough to get rid of the rotten wood and the rotten drywall, but we have to, this is where you have to basically watch the movie and decide how far you have to go. It could be scrubbing all the walls. It could be, cleaning the carpets and getting the drapes dry cleaned and your clothes all cleaned, etc. It's really, really, really serious. And when you watch that show, you'll really understand. Also, HEPA filters, I think, are the only filters that are, I would say, they're the best, the most reliable for removing mycotoxins. There are other different types of technologies like ion type filters, but the HEPA filter has been traditionally known to really remove mycotoxins from the air. But if you've had devastating mold in your home,